mostly all other countries like Russia and whatever, they would be forced together and it gave them a certain strength. But in Germany, they were never persecuted and they assimilated totally into the German society. I mean, Sigmund Freud, you know, I mean, they were naming it, you know, they had German names. The German Jews were more German than they were Jewish. Even when they came to America, when other Jews came here, they looked down upon them like they were, you know, something.
That's what I hear too.
Huh?
That's right.
What's the point?
No, I don't know. You know, just that there was never any persecution in Germany, and they became Germans.
There is a point. We know how it relates here.
You know, I don't know.
It relates very
I know how it
well.
relates very well. I just don't want to say it because it's too strong.
Huh? I mean, they named their kids German names, and you know.
I don't know how it relates to what you were saying.
It says in the Medrash. It says in the Medrash. Listen, I didn't want to say it, but it definitely relates what you're saying. But it's strong stuff.
And persecution, they band together. They stuck together. But because there was no persecution, that they were flourishing in the society, and they just became Germans.
Well, the thing I wanted to say about that was just an introduction that this is not in any way infringing upon the sensitivity of the matter of what happened in Germany to the Jews. The Jews, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, but it says in the Medrash, it says in Talmud that the nation of the Jews is compared to like a clothing, a dress made out of silk, where every little stain is magnified 1,000 times, 1,000-fold. So, for example, when you're wearing a bear skin, or some other rough form of thing, so there's a stain or something,
You don't see it.
you don't see it so much. But when it happens to the Jewish people, and this has been tested one time and again, proven time and again, that the little stains, they become magnified so much so that they have bizarre and extreme effects on the Jewish nation. There's no question there's a connection. Jews that believe, and this, like I say, it might sound a little strong or might sound a little insensitive, but this is, on the contrary, is the most sensitive. Jews believe that if they allow themselves to succumb and their souls become servants to their bodies, eventually their bodies will destroy them. Or not their bodies necessarily, the physical universe, which is in a way what happened in Germany. This is what it says in the Talmud, that when the Jews bring upon, that they can only bring the destruction upon themselves in a way. If they allow the spiritual forces to succumb and to become servants to the physical, even their own little lives in the extreme sense, the assimilation that you described, eventually it will occur, what will happen is that it will drag them down.
Well,
because of that little stain, even if it's a little
thing.
thing.
It seems to be paralleling itself
It's very,
in America.
understand why it's
now.
strong what I'm saying?
Exactly, yes.
Why not
It
others?
seems to be
People don't
what's
like to
going
hear
on-
this because this is like a strong responsibility.
It seems
why?
to be what's going on in America now.
Yeah.
It's only in America.
Yeah, but there's always the illusion that you can live in
Why?
that like, which shows how good we are actually as people. That when you imagine of the most evil forms of life, of persecution, you can never really imagine the strength of it. You'll always find a good side to it. Well, now this is good about it, now this won't happen, because since we're good people inside, we can never imagine 100% evil in any way. You know what I'm saying?
Consider it in relation to what you were saying before.
So, for example, if for example the president of the United States would be elected and would start taxing Jews, let's say, and then start making laws against Jews. I'll give you an example.
Well, then they would
That they
band
can become
together.
lawyers and doctors. One second. I just want to say one point. What would happen is most Jews would say, well, okay, well, this will probably pass. You know? Because there's always the good side that does not allow you to think that people are just 100%
But
evil.
persecution is what banded them together in all of those other countries. Because
Well, see, they were persecuted too in Germany, but all at once. They didn't have
no,
time.
for sure, because what, like what Simon was just saying, because
You don't
the
persecute.
physical had taken over the spiritual, that, and you know, even though he doesn't want to make an absolute statement about that, because it is a kind of a very harsh statement.
How about
To do with Spain,
how about this example? Just
Right, that's what I wanted to say.
Well, I'm
too.
saying, how can the Jews in America, we feel pretty complacent, what could rock our world? Well, let's see, they've never really had anything. This is really, really scary, this thing. It's like, isn't this all about the Jews? It's all about Palestine. It's all about Israel. People in America, they don't really care about the Jews that much. You could say, well, geez, this is really getting scary. What the hell are we defending the Jews for anyways? You know, this is really affecting our country. Who are these Jews? What's the point? What do we have to gain by supporting them? You know, let's get them the hell out of here. Or, you know, this could happen. This is, to me, a brutal cover. This is like, you said, it looks like me. It's something weird. Focus in on it, because people, I always said for, here,
I thought we decided we're not soliciting any companies.
oh, well, we'll
Let's
check it
let's
out.
freak that out.
But I mean, this is like a real thing, that terrorism, I'm saying, it happens in Athens, it happens in Rome. For people in this country, in Minneapolis, people that are, it's no big deal. If this should start to happen in Kansas City, in these real American places, people that aren't Jews, that really don't care either way, are going to say, what the hell is with these Jews? They're screwing up our whole country. Well, he won't, because
Well,
he likes me.
But also, you know,
Yeah, I mean, but this is really giving me a little coronary here, and I think that Baruch should
But why?
add in
but
on
get
it.
even back to what
It's
Kenny
already
was saying
happening.
about
We'll go back to Spain.
Germany.
Something
So,
happened in Spain.
and
The Jews
and
get
to what
tremendous
Simon was saying about the
prominence.
Amalek,
They intermarry with the
It's the-
royalty,
it's
with,
like-
with the aristocracy, and
being
it's probably some
able
way.
to recognize the coldness, being able to, like, mirroring the things that are evil or bad or cold, I don't really know what word to use, is what enables you to kind of like live a balanced life and feel Jewish and maybe a connection. If you live in Germany before Hitler comes to power and you don't, there's nothing cold because you're just another German with a Jewish name, then you don't see it
Yeah.
reflected around you, and then you're vulnerable to it. I think it relates to what you were saying about the Amalek, because that seems like what was happening. There's no problem here, you know. We're just people.
Right, exactly, that's good, good.
But
Yep.
that's, but
Well,
there was
The
also,
Nazis are considered by many Jews that are familiar with Amalek's as one of the manifestations through the generations of
I
that
heard an
Of what? Of
interesting,
evil.
Tell the story.
should I tell this
Yeah,
story?
he told me a story yesterday.
manifestation of a negative force getting control.
That's what Amalek
Reichstag.
meant or something.
This story I heard this guy that jazz musician in the Crown Heights area with the beautiful board told me this story that I don't know if it was in the Megillah or where, but it was prophesied that in the year something 46, 10 descendants of Haman would be killed. And it so happened that in 1946, the New York Times ran this small article that some people had read, that 10 Nazi convicted war criminals were hung, and when the last one was hung, he said something like, the Purim Festival, the Purim Feast, 1946. He screamed it in his dying breath.
Cool. Oh,
Have you ever heard this, or is this?
I've never heard.
But it's a weird story.
That it is.
That it is. we feature some of the bizarre, some of the comical. We do it all. Jacobson household.
Simon, But there was, at that, in that particular decade preceding Hitler, there may not have been open persecution of the Jews, but certainly in Germany it had happened before. There had been persecution, they were living in ghettos, and there were terrible massacres.
Everywhere.
So if we're talking about doubt, I mean, one of the things about doubt, it's interesting, is that sometimes we were talking before about good doubt, important doubt, but sometimes people will pull down the shade on it because they don't want to see it. And isn't that part of
Like
what
that?
the... Yeah, like that.
Like that. Well,
We just saw your moment of truth.
great.
When-
I'm happy.
When
She's got nothing to hide.
it went down your throat.
Huh?
It went down your throat.
I feel that in my mouth. Come on.
Won't come out the same way it went in. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but about this relationship between the two kinds of doubt and the fact that this assimilation happened perhaps because of an unwillingness to perceive the good doubt, the good restraint, the part that was saying, okay, you've got to maintain the connection of the spiritual with the physical. So instead, because it was very comfortable to just let the physical be happy and pull down the shade on the accurate perception of the past and what could happen in the present or the future.
I think I know what you're saying because
Oh, good.
you're trying. I mean, I think what you're saying.
Those two gentlemen there are your defenders constantly.
What you're
Do I need to be
saying is
defended?
that it's like if you pull down the blinds and you kind of like
How do you feel about it?
No.
you make things the way you know kind of rose colored so that you don't have to worry about persecution and stuff like that.
If I may. I asked my grandma, I was back in Minneapolis, and I asked her, she's very,
Can you say, tell us her name for the camera.
this is Min Himmelman, Mildred, actually her name was Min, and her mother called her Minnie, but there was a cow literally a few blocks away named Minnie, so she changed her name to Mildred, but we call her Min now.
There's a cow across the street named Mildred.
Minnie?
Mildred.
No, you gotta change it back.
When she comes to New York, she'll change.
How about Beth or something? Anyway, I asked her, I wanted to know where in our family tree the observant Jews got off the observant boat, so to speak. And you know, it was like, she's a devout, has these really well-developed Jewish values. And on the other hand, she just hates it. They're so close-minded, you know, it's all this thing. You'd have a heyday with it. But anyway, it turns out, you know, it's very recently that these
Well, you
people...
told her you were coming here, she told you.
No, she kind of like...
careful, babe.
She was telling me all this stuff now that it's old customs and all this, so I said, I faked her out. I said, Grandma, you're really right. I like being with you. I really learned something from you today. And I faked her out. She goes, what? She likes that I learned. They are old customs. They're not useful today. When I have a son, forget the bar mitzvah. It's just, no. I said, see, Grandma, you're nuts. She goes, well, maybe. But you know, it was only recently. I mean, I wonder what went through their mind. I guess they were coming to America. That's where they lost it, or when?
No, I think it was gradual. The Amalek was very much an active force. It's like one doubt leads to the next. Slowly, you don't even feel it happening. Suddenly you don't think it
In
happens.
the 1800s,
Me.
in the 1800s, Jews were,
Tell us about, Kenny, tell us about the 1800s.
you know,
Go ahead, what's the question?
were Jews observant Jews? Either you were observant Jew or you like weren't Jewish or what?
Camera on the expert. Mr. Ferguson.
The Talmud
I thought he was
says
going to say,
never
oh, it's
answer
so
questions.
long ago. But I remember one story.
I do remember. inner information, which is the most elusive, and it's usually covered over by a film and hidden, was the stuff most quickly forgotten. And
Right.
when people came here, they came with empty rituals. And so when they had children and they were lighting a candle, they didn't know why, or they didn't know what to say. So the children, like our parents, opted for golf.
At least has published rule book.
Or tennis or whatever, and
That's so true.
and that's basically it, So
It's
I
like-
think what we're doing here is we come here and we get we connect with things that were, that were.
We're not learning the old rituals, though. I mean,
No, we're not. I mean, but here
Just
we're.
wait, Jim. Haven't you, before we got into the discussion on camera,
That was excellent.
weren't we talking about
That's right.
why aren't we being terrorized in the United States also?
Why are we, or?
Why aren't we
What am
being
I
actually,
doing?
why aren't we being
but
terrorized?
that's such a,
Why not you?
But, it's
but that's
like-
such a, like, that's the question that always turns me off about these kind of discussions.
But the thing is that I think it's right now it's coming over to,
It's like what's interesting is, the spiritual stuff, that there's this book that says, here are these, here's these ways to see more truth in your life. That's what's meaningful
Well,
to
they
me.
also, this world, which involves that magazine, is just as important. I mean, they really are, they're the marriage of the
Yeah, but I have a feeling that if people could live life closer to the truth, that magazine would sell a lot less copies than it does, and it would be less important.
Which magazine?
Newsweek.
Newsweek. Well, you gotta hurry up.
I mean, I don't know, it's kind of,
Get on the train, babe.
Controlling the explosion.
Yeah, right.
It's something like this.
it's, they always fall off. I mean, that's why I don't wear them.
Gotta
It's
get-
true, it's,
I
you
would
know.
worry too, I worry. Get that bar,
They-
that bar, that
That's the
bar.
only thing God did wrong in the creation.
The way he designed that, the keeper was ridiculous.
Actually, there is a little string that can be worn, but
Amalek keeps pulling it off.
I don't know.
I'll wear it if it makes you feel better, Pete.
I like to look at that magazine, and I like in that sort of way to say, yeah, there is a need to really band together, in this certain way. I don't know if it's,
And distribute.
I don't know the truth.
huh?
This itself, what we're talking about now, being a physical reality, is discussed at length in the Torah. What is the solution of this? It's never. For example, what are the real causes of this hate? And what do you mean us and them? Most intelligent, assimilated Jews will say, what do you mean us and them? We're all human beings. And the truth is that according to the Torah and Judaism's belief, the truth is, it is in a way we are all one. The fact of the matter is, there are many. Without getting into the causes of the fact that there is that gap, or that one of the facts that the Torah says about the whole relationship between Jews and non-Jews, and the world of persecution and the pain and everything we were talking about, is that contrary to what logically makes sense, and this is what the Jews had thought about, and those that have assimilated for good reasons, that they felt that anti-Semitism and the hate that's caused is because they look at us as different. We do not want to be. We always have something. We have our own religious beliefs that are always more powerful than the beliefs of nationalism in the country, or social values are not as important as our communal values, synagogue or Jewish traditions. So they felt that if we can assimilate both things together, the beauty of what Judaism is with the beauty of Christianity, or or general society, we can get somewhere, and more understanding between us will bring to less hate and less prejudice. People live, your next door neighbor, you get to know them, makes no difference whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish, you get to know them personally. It's when the prejudice is set in, when you don't know who they are, what kind of people they are like. So you just have a stereotype that you've never seen, but it settles in, so it comes and it grows and it grows until it explodes into bizarre forms in different ways of extreme persecution or anti-Semitism, whatever. That is basically the belief of the big thinkers, Jewish thinkers, that believed very much in the assimilating power. Now this is a very logical and very rational argument that I just said. Very hard to dispute because that makes sense. The fact that they don't take in consideration is that there's a logical and explanation from in the physical sense and mundane. This is how things work. What about the spiritual? What happens to that in these situations? Is that a factor or it's not a factor? For example, it makes very much sense, But does that mean, let's take it to the extreme, why not then compromise the whole business? Who's Jews and non-Jews, that whole difference? Who says there has to be that whole division? It should be one human race and divided into countries or races or whatever. Why such a split of Judaism and non-Jews, that Jews, according to Jewish law, are not allowed to intermarry, must always be kept separate, whatever, all the differences. Just get rid of the whole split, the whole division, and live, you live with your grandmother's or grandfather's traditions, but cut out the whole, why we have to make absolute strong differences between us. Because that is eventually the logical course. Except those Jews that had that, those thinkers could not say what I just said because no one would accept that. No Jews would accept that. Because they said that we cannot give up something that we had so many years, even for irrational reasons. But then no one would accept that, so they were not able to come out with such a policy. Even though there were Jewish thinkers who said, at times in the emancipation of Jews in the 1700s or whatever, that why not let us convert the whole Jewish race, baptize them all to Christians, and show the Christians that we want to be one with them. And we could always, and afterwards we can continue. Those that want to put on tefillin, those that want to go to shul, those that like Yom Kippur will keep whatever they like. There were Jews that did that, but those were the minority because the mass Jews still had a lot of the contact to the spiritual reality of what Judaism was, that they would never accept that. So there were those that were in the in-between line that said, we shall, like I described before, the whole argument of living with each other closer and showing them that we can be just like them and assimilating, looking alike, the rest of the things, which eventually, so that's what I asked what was the spiritual factor. The Torah happens to be, I'll put it bluntly, which might not, it is contrary to that opinion. The Torah says this will never work, it will not work. It was tried. What happened was, since Judaism exists, this has been tried over and over again. In Jewish history, at least 20, 30 times. Every few generations it reoccurs. What happens is, when this occurs, when this way of thinking occurs, the Jews slowly deny it, and every generation drops more and more. Because what happened was, they forgot the first point was, they didn't say anything about the spiritual side of it. What happens, just in case, let's talk even from the skeptical approach, what do you say then? Let us say, like I described before, which is, let's say, hard to accept, but let's say it's true, that spirituality is where it's at. And the physical and rational decisions that we think how it works is only an external film that is added on. If that is true, so what did they do? They went and they made some rational decisions and decided that you can compromise the spiritual because then we will be more accepted. But let us say the spiritual happens to be the most active and most powerful force there exists, except that our five senses don't perceive it, so we can deny that it exists, or we think it's only once a year, Yom Kippur or something like that. But let us say it is the most powerful force that's in there. And one moment of truth, even though we might not be aware of it, but it controls us more than all the physical things that go on, if that is true. So what they did was they compromised that completely with physical and rational decisions, and not only does the Torah says, not only does that not bring peace between you and your Christian neighbor, but it will bring the biggest hatred that's possible. Because what you did was, you denied and you pushed out that whole spirituality out of your own life. In other words, the Torah says a Jew has to be a living example of what a divine being is supposed to look like. His mind has to be how God would think. When we speak about God, I've described many times what I mean by God, right? I don't like to use that term here, but his mind becomes connected to more than just his limited self, but he connects to that reality that we described before, the spiritual. When he realizes his spiritual senses, he becomes connected to something, and he becomes a living example of a moral and social and spiritual human being. And what happens, and the only way of doing that is by holding strong to his spirit, never compromising on the spiritual part of it, what he does. Because he knows that is the ultimate, that reality that keeps everything going. And the compromise on that will bring eventually what happened with the Nazis, for example. But even without that extreme case, it will eventually what will happen is the assimilation will cause complete disappearance of the Jew. And what he does is he holds strong with his spiritual beliefs. And on the contrary, that brings respect. This is how the Torah, that will bring respect, because he's not a hypocrite who's trying to show his Christian neighbor that, listen, I really love you and I'm doing everything that you're doing, but really inside he might do something else, and the Christian will say, well, why are you doing that way? But he's a real person, and he tells the Christian, I am what I am, and I am Jewish, for example, and I know what and Judaism and moralism and social and democracy all work hand in hand. On the contrary, he becomes like a living example, almost like a teacher, to not only to Jews, also to non-Jews. And each person has to feel, and that is the duty of a human being according to the Jewish religion, whether it's a Jew or non-Jew, that they become they have to make the spirituality part of their life, and they become a living example of what it's supposed to be. And that will not only not cause hatred, on the contrary, that will cause the biggest respect. The biggest problem becomes when the hypocrisy sets in, that they start looking at Jews thieves, and Jews lend money for high interest rates, all the other prejudices involved. And always what happened in history, and this is that whenever there were two things that occurred. The Jews that assimilated, what happened is they disappeared. Because that initial compromise of the spiritual eventually caused every generation compromised more until it disappeared. And it has happened. In the time of the Talmud, there was a group called, I don't know the name for it in English, but there was a group that did the same. They felt the same thing.
Was it a tribe or what?
No, a group of Jews, and there were quite a few of them. And it was in the Greek, when the Greek Empire was, time of the Greek Empire, and they did that. And what happened was that there's not one left of them today. I mean, I'm sure they have grandchildren, but they're not significant in any way. Nothing Jewish remained from them, and it has happened time and time again. And there's no question so without even getting into intellectual proof one way or the other, that's what happens. That's what happens because we are not aware of how powerful the spiritual is, and we might sometimes imagine for our own personal convenience sake, the compromise of something spiritual for that moment is not that much. It's a little thing. And what it can do is that's what it causes. And we don't have which maybe is fortunate. We are not able to see. We were not given the ability to see how a little act can cause revolutions for generations to come. And our grandparents had not seen that. And what happened was what happened. The second thing that happens is because it all works in the system, like I described before. The system works this way, and I'm almost saying this. When I'm saying. I accept this because I've studied this, and I see it to be true in a smaller sense. So it's not something I'm just saying that you have to accept. It's hard. What I'm saying is contrary to conventional thinking usually about these matters. So really, I'm talking very quickly without getting into elaborate points about it. But the second thing that happens is the loss of respect from the non-Jew to the Jew because of all this. On the contrary, when he sees that he's running after him, trying to show that he's just like him. What happens then is the biggest damage. You also don't see it immediately. Immediately you're both dancing at the same party.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens at the end is that, just like what happens without Jews and non-Jews, between friends, if you try to copy your friend too much, you try to become, what happens is the biggest destruction occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is true. So in other words, the differences of Jews and non-Jews, the Torah teaches, are absolute differences, that you can never change that. It's not something that society has made. And it's not, but on the other hand, you have to know that the differences are not negative. Each has a function in this world which is totally superior in its own sense. Each can reach spiritual development and contribute to the development of the universe as a whole. No one is inferior, no one is superior. Each has their function. It's like two different limbs in the body. Each has their function. If one limb if the eye tries to become the nose, what happens?
You start smelling instead of seeing, or
Right.
be weird.